Endurance, disease, and discipline in the belly of empire. Life on board a ship of the Dutch East India Company VOC was not for the faint-hearted. It was a brutal, claustrophobic existence where survival was uncertain and dignity was a luxury. Far from the romanticized image of adventure on the high seas, the day-to-day reality was one of toil, terror, and tension, endured for months on end by hundreds of men packed into the dark belly of a vessel built for profit, not comfort. Cramped quarters and no escape. A VOC ship typically carried between 150 to 300 men, all crammed into the ship's narrow, suffocating compartments like cargo stacked in a merchant's ledger. There was no privacy, no personal space, just hierarchy and proximity. Sailors, soldiers, cooks, gunners, and servants each had their assigned niches, but only the officers enjoyed the illusion of space, tucked behind doors that offered at least the dignity of separation. Below deck, life descended into something closer to imprisonment than voyage. The air grew heavy with each passing day, trapped beneath low ceilings that forced most men to stoop or crawl. The wooden beams dripped with condensation. Every surface seemed alive with rot, as the stale stench of sweat, vomit, unwashed bodies, bilge water, spoiled food, and smoke thickened into something almost tangible. It clung to the skin, soaked into clothing, and made breathing a chore. Light barely pierced the gloom. Oil lamps flickered weakly, casting distorted shadows that danced along the swollen beams. Rats scurried freely across planks and into sacks, bold and unbothered, drawn by the ever-present food scraps and the warm bodies packed in rows. Men slept in hammocks, strung side by side like drying laundry, swinging with the roll of the sea. Others lay directly on damp wooden boards, curled against their meager possessions, if they had any. Water seeped in through seams, and the scratching of vermin was never far off. Some men tied themselves to beams to keep from falling in heavy seas. At night, the constant creak of timber, the groan of sails, and the distant roar of waves became a lullaby of dread, a reminder that the ocean outside was wide, merciless, and always waiting. The ship was a floating cage, a small, creaking world suspended between sky and sea. And in that world, freedom was an illusion, privacy a dream, and escape nothing more than a whisper swallowed by the wind. Rations of survival. The food on VOC ships was almost as cruel as the ocean itself. Provisions were loaded in bulk to last for the long journey, often up to 8 to 10 months without resupply. That meant dry, heavily salted, and preserved food items were the only options. Sailors survived on hardtack, dry, dense biscuits that were often so hard they had to be soaked in beer or water to soften. These were riddled with weevils and maggots, which the men either picked out or ate without complaint. Salted beef and pork were stored in casks, but after months in the heat, they became tough, sour, and rancid. Dried peas, beans, porridge, and occasionally rice filled the gaps, though they offered little variety or relief. Water was stored in wooden barrels and quickly went bad. After just a few weeks at sea, it turned slimy and green with algae and bacteria. Sailors mixed it with low-alcohol beer, vinegar, or citrus peels to make it bearable. Nonetheless, dehydration was common, and men were often forced to choose between thirst and illness. Officers and upper-ranking VOC personnel received better food, wine, and fresh fruit when available. But even their luxuries degraded with time. Food envy became a quiet source of resentment, particularly as hunger wore down the crew's civility. Disease and death in the dark. On every VOC ship, death was a silent passenger. It rode in the barrels of spoiled food, bred in the filthy decks, and settled into the lungs of the weary and weak. Scurvy was the most infamous killer, a slow breakdown of the body caused by a lack of vitamin C. Symptoms began with swollen, bleeding gums, bruising, and fatigue. Eventually, men would collapse with open sores, blackened limbs, and the stink of rotting flesh. Once bedridden, few recovered. Other diseases were just as ruthless. Dysentery, cholera, typhus, and malaria on the return journey ravaged the crew. With no real medical care, treatment was rudimentary. The barber surgeon was often the only person with any training, using rusty saws and knives to perform amputations or drain infected wounds. Leeches, poultices, and herbal brews were applied with more hope than science. The ship's hold, where the sick were often kept, became a living morgue. Men lay in their filth, delirious, feverish, and forgotten. At times, multiple burials at sea occurred daily, the dead wrapped in sailcloth or hammocks, sewn shut with the last stitch through their nose, a final check to ensure they were truly gone, before being cast overboard with a cannonball. Brutal discipline and fear. To maintain order among a crew on the brink of chaos, the VOC enforced iron discipline. The hierarchy was strict and absolute. Officers gave orders that could not be questioned. The penalty for disobedience, insubordination, or theft was immediate and brutal. Punishments included flogging with cat-o'-nine tails, being clapped in irons, or tied to the mast in the sun for hours. The most feared punishment was keel hauling, where a sailor was dragged underneath the ship's hull, scraping against barnacles and splinters, often resulting in serious injury or drowning. There was little room for mercy. The officers were trained to stamp out dissent before it could fester into mutiny. Men who spoke of rebellion could vanish without explanation. Alcohol was both a balm and a curse, issued in rations, but abuse led to fights, injuries, or even death. Everyone knew that in the middle of the ocean, there was no justice beyond the captain's word, and that could mean salvation or doom. Moments of escape. Amid the torment, there were rare moments when life on board softened. On calm days, when the sea was quiet and the sails full, the crew might gather on deck to play dice, carve wooden trinkets, or sing shanties that reminded them of home. Sailors told stories, tales of sea monsters, lost loves, and the treasures of the Indies, to keep their minds off the gnawing present. Religious observance offered a spiritual escape. On Sundays, the chaplain held sermons and prayer services. Sailors, regardless of rank, stood shoulder to shoulder as verses were read aloud, sometimes weeping quietly, not always out of faith, but from longing, guilt, or despair. Occasionally, exotic birds, dolphins, or strange marine creatures appeared alongside the ship. These became omens or moments of awe, and the men would crowd the rails to watch, pointing and whispering like children. Some kept journals, scribbling their fears, hopes, or crude drawings onto scraps of paper. These rare surviving logs are today the most poignant windows into the mental life of these men, a testament to resilience, boredom, and the universal hunger to be remembered. A life measured in salt and suffering. For those who signed on, life aboard a VOC ship was a leap into the unknown. Promises of silver, adventure, or escape lured thousands into the company's ranks. But what they found was often worse than anything they'd left behind. Survival was not guaranteed. 1/3 of all VOC sailors never returned, their bones scattered across the seabed or buried in forgotten colonial outposts. Those who made it home came back changed, hardened by hunger, haunted by loss, and marked forever by the vastness of the sea. Yet it was their suffering, sacrifice, and skill that kept the wheels of the VOC empire turning. Without these anonymous souls, there would have been no nutmeg, no cinnamon, no golden age for the Dutch Republic. The VOC's legacy may be one of commerce and conquest, but beneath every ledger and map lies the story of these men. Ordinary lives weathered by extraordinary hardship, their voices echoing through history in the creak of old ships and the crash of forgotten waves. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, stay sharp and skeptical.